From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm Vasilios. That's Sean Fazan. Remember to like, subscribe, rate, and review. Download the whole nine. Everything helps, and we're able to get more views on this and get you guys more content more frequently as well. Sean Fazan, how you doing today, man?
Doing all right. Before we get started, remember, wherever you get your podcast, be sure to subscribe, like, rate, review. Go to the Fox 8 Overtime YouTube page. Trying to get those subscriber numbers up. It's a good spot to find this video, this content, which we'll be cranking out more and more as the weeks go on.
And as the draft approaches.
So, speaking of the draft, great segue. Today's lesson, or today's theme, or today's topic is mock draft. My mock draft from last week, you saw it released on Twitter. If you read it, thank you. If you did not, guess what? We're going to go through it today. Even if you didn't read it, maybe we're going to expand upon it a little bit today. My thoughts on why I think these certain players fit well in their certain spots. I also think that I will have an updated mock draft probably middle of next week at the latest. Still doing some research on some guys, just trying to gather the last little bit of information. But nonetheless, it's that time of year. Everyone has really turned their attention to the draft, and rightfully so. But before we get into this mock draft, I want to get into your mock draft, Sil, because what Sil does every year is Sil goes through different simulators, different publications, and kind of basically takes a poll of first-round picks, percentages, prospects linked to certain teams, and you usually find some decent numbers when it comes to the Saints. Now, to remind everyone, the Saints pick at 29 in the first round for now. We'll talk about trade scenarios if we have a little bit of time a little bit later. But what did you find when you really went through all the simulators, all the mock drafts? This is just for the first-round pick, and I'm going to go through all 8 picks after that. But who did you find was the most likely candidate for the Saints to pick in the mock draft simulators?
So you did a great job breaking down exactly what I do. So it's 5 different simulators. The most common name that I came across at 23% of the time at the 29th pick for the Saints was Mazi Smith, the defensive lineman from Michigan. And he was there 23% of the time, and that's who they selected 23% of the time. The next highest was Lucas Van Ness, who I think you're pretty high on as well.
The edge player out of Iowa. That's interesting that he was available at 29 in a lot of those mocks, or I guess in a lot of those simulators to be available at 29. Yeah. That is certainly interesting. Who else you got?
So the next highest at 13%, Will McDonald.
Edge player, is that correct?
Player. Yes, sir. And that kind of is the case for this entire exercise, is that 73% of the time in this draft, the Saints selected a defensive lineman.
That makes sense. It makes sense. There's a need there, obviously, and they love drafting along the defensive line of scrimmage. Why don't you just go through all the names? Just
sure.
hit us all up. Just go in order. You have your first 3 there. Who's number 4?
So number 4 at 8%. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, 8%. We have Brian Breesy, the defensive tackle.
Out of Clemson. Okay.
And then we have so a lot of these guys have 5%. I excluded a lot of the guys that were like 1 to 2% and everything like that, because those were kind of outliers.
So those are your top 4: Mazi Smith, Lucas Van Ness, which is a surprise. I would jump all over that if he was available. Will McDonald, an undersized edge player, and Brian. Is it Breesy? I've heard it pronounced different ways, but nonetheless, I think we know who we're talking about. The defensive tackle out of Clemson. Who's next?
And then a couple of guys at 5%. It is Nolan Smith from Georgia, the edge guy. And let's see, we got B.J. Ojolari, LSU's own.
Okay.
And Osiris Torrance, an offensive lineman.
He's been one of our mock draft heroes, or at least one of our prospect heroes here on Fox 8. We've talked about him over the overtime shows over the last couple of weeks. He's popped up quite a bit. The former Louisiana native, obviously. So an interior offensive lineman. Okay, so let's just refresh the list. You have Mazi Smith, which makes sense. Lucas Van Ness, which is a little bit of a surprise, but I think it makes sense in terms of why the Saints would like him.
Sure.
Will McDonald, is that correct?
Yes.
Brian Brian Bresee, defensive tackle out of Clemson, and then B.J. Ojolari, and who was the tie for the 5%er?
Nolan Smith.
Nolan Smith. Okay. There you have it. A little bit of a mathematic exercise there just in terms of breaking down some numbers. There are a few guys on that list that I would cross off immediately because I know the Saints, and I know they're not going to draft undersized edge players, and you named about 3 of them right there, so that's not going to happen in the first round. But it is interesting to see because not all those databases know how the Saints draft. They just know what the needs are versus what they have and what could potentially be available.
And that's why I use so many of those because a lot of them can be biased.
Who do you use? Well, just throw a few names out there. Who
Sure.
do you use?
Pro Football Focus was the first one I used.
That seems to be the most popular one.
NFL mock draft database. It's more of a crowdsourced, like just fan run website. Draft Network, which is pretty popular as well, and FanSpeak, which is another crowdsourced option. So a lot of these websites use draft boards from writers from different websites and everything like that, and so they kind of aggregate these things into singular.
Yeah, and I've done a few of these simulations, and roughly they're all in the same neighborhood when it comes to board rankings. Now, once you get past the first round and a half, middle of the second round, then the grades can get a little crazy when you could talk about mid-day 2 into day 3. A 4th-round prospect on one board could be a 7th-round prospect on another board. That's what makes the mock draft process for me always takes a little bit longer than I suspect because I always like to do my research in terms of, okay, am I out of left field with this guy in this certain round despite what a simulator might say? So that's why it usually takes a little bit longer for me to get things going. But with that in mind, I will tell you my first round, we're going to start now with my mock draft. My first round pick was one of the guys you mentioned. It was defensive tackle Brian Bresee out of Clemson, the defensive tackle who was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, went to Clemson, was on the path to a great career. A little bit of inconsistent year last year, dealt with some personal tragedy with the death of his younger sister. Awful news, tragic news. But when you watch the tape, and I think the Saints are going to be, it's interesting they said Mazi Smith was number 1 because Mazi Smith, Brian Bresee, and Kalijah Kancey are the 3 defensive tackles that I think the Saints will have a legitimate shot at 29 when they come around. At least one of those 3 should be available, and we'll see if they feel highly about that prospect. To me, of those 3, Bresee was the most well-rounded. I thought Kalijah Kancey had the quickest. He's a smaller guy, so a quicker up-the-field type guy. Mazi Smith had great hands, but was more of a run-stuffing guy. I felt like Bresee was a little bit more well-rounded, can play the nose, can play the 3-tech, and can get in the backfield, but can also hold up at the point of attack. So he was my guy at 29 overall, Brian Bresee, the defensive tackle out of Clemson. So I think we're right, kind of in the same. I think we're in the same neighborhood there in terms of what's out there versus what I view. A, what the Saints need. B, I know how they like to draft, and C, I think this guy could check a few boxes. My second round pick, I'm going to stay in the front 7. I'm going to stay along the defensive line, and this is another one of those guys. The grades are all over the place. I've seen him as high as in the 30s, back into the first round. I've seen him as low as in the 3rd round, but he was incredibly productive at a major university, and he's got the length that they like on the edge. I'm talking about Isaiah Foskey out of Notre Dame. You watch the tape on this guy. He's got great length. He can turn the corner. He is relentless. There was a little bit of a knock on him that said, a lot of his sacks came where he kind of just ran into him, wasn't necessarily him disrupting. I'm sorry, but 22 sacks over 2 seasons, he's doing something right. If for no other reason, I want that good luck on the field.
Yeah.
I want that good luck on the field. So I think that's a quality pick at 40, Isaiah Foskey out of Notre Dame. Like I said before, it's hard always to get a consensus on the grades, but I did the simulations. I did my own research. I feel pretty confident he would be available at 40. 3rd round, gonna like it. They're going to like it. He's a running back out of Tulane.
Ooh.
His name is Tyjae Spears. Now, I don't think this is too high for Tyjae Spears, but I think I overdrafted him based off of the analytics of what's out there because I think it's more of a late 3rd, early 4th for Tyjae Spears, but this is tremendous value. Local son lands with a local team. He's already told us he would play for the Saints in a heartbeat, lightning in a bottle. I think he's a guy that could eventually replace Alvin Kamara with that style. And he's more football speed than track speed, which is what I really love. I don't need a guy that's going to run 4.3 in shorts. I need a guy that's going to outrun somebody when he's breaking one for 80. And I think he's got that. He's got a desire to play for his hometown team. If he's available, Saints shouldn't hesitate. Tyjae Spears can be that guy. He is that explosive of a playmaker. So I know we're going to get some responses out of that. In fact, when I released the mock draft, got quite a bit of a response, especially from some of the people downstairs. So Tyjae Spears, I love it. They need a running back. I say bring him in if he's available in the third round. Fourth round, 115th overall. Now make sure I say this guy's name right, because if you say it wrong, it can be a problem.
Yes.
Zach Kuntz is a tight end out of Old Dominion. All right. This dude is a specimen. 6'7", 255. You watch Old Dominion tape, he is the best player by a mile on either team. Whenever he's on the field, it is not hard to notice him. Those smaller schools, they're not going to get players that size. Now, I found out he started his career at Penn State, and I know you're thinking, small school tight end. It didn't work out with Adam Trautman, or it hasn't worked out yet with Adam Trautman. I don't think this is the same situation. I think this is a guy that started big, kind of went back to a smaller school. He is a dynamic pass-catching tight end, 6'7", 255, ran a 4.5 40. I mean, this dude is a specimen, and I think he's a guy that can add some explosive playmaking ability to the Saints' offense if he can grasp it and pick it up. I think the Saints are in the market for a tight end in this class, so I like that pick. Fifth round, 146 overall, Owen Pappoe, linebacker out of Auburn. I remember this name vividly when I was very into recruiting. This name popped off quite a bit on the rankings, shooting up the rankings boards, and there was a lot of he had a lot of teams after him. He went to Auburn. He's got a ton of SEC experience. He can play zone. He can play in coverage. He's got great sideline to sideline range. In fact, I'm surprised he was rated this low at 146. So Owen Pappoe to me would be great value at 146. Fifth round, 165. We're going to stay in the SEC and stay with the experience theme. I'm going to go along the interior of the offensive line, which is something they're going to address. They're going to address the interior offensive line. It's going to happen probably sooner than this. But at 165, I went with Nick Broeker, guard out of Ole Miss. 3-year starter, 48 career starts at Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin and those guys. He played both tackle and guard. He's about 6'4", 3-something, 3 and change. So I'd be curious to see where he's at lengthwise. I think that's probably why he's rated this low, because he's probably not the longest of guys along the line of scrimmage. The Saints do value length, but at this stage, this experience, 165 with that versatility, I think he's worth the risk. I think he can be a guy that can add value and versatility and depth along the offensive line.
That's why they like guys like James Hurst right now.
They love it. I mean, and look, you normally see the center guard or the swing tackle, but the guard tackle, to me, is just as valuable when it comes to versatility. Seventh round, another big name. Some love it, some hate it. I was told a certain investigative reporter, a family member of a certain investigative reporter here at the station, Mr. Zurich, is a huge fan of this pick, so I admire or I appreciate that. Stetson Bennett.
I knew that's where you were
quarterback out of Georgia at 227. Okay. I've already told you it's smart business to invest in the quarterback position. I think here, this is a guy, he had a crazy college career, but he finished strong. Got the bonus years, I guess with the COVID stuff and all that, NIL, all that stuff that he was able to stick around. But the first year he won the national championship, he was a guy that made decent decisions. But the second year, he won games for them, especially in the college football playoff. I thought he was fantastic. And you got to stop and pause and look around the league and just look at this category of quarterback that is emerging. You have your elite starters. You have your good starters. You have your average starters. But there is this niche that's getting carved out of these spot starter, high-end backup types that can come in and plug in the gap for a team and play well. Mike White's.
Yeah.
Brock Purdy.
Brock
I
Purdy
mean, I
being-
guess Andy
yeah.
Dalton's kind of at that point in his career where in a small window, but there's value on these types of players because
Agreed.
I think we're seeing with the high rate of injury and it certainly feels like lately a lot of quarterbacks have been getting banged up. There are value in these types of players. I mean, your guy, Baltimore, what's his name?
Lamar Jackson.
No, I mean, the
Ty-
backup.
Tyler Huntley.
Huntley.
Yeah.
I mean, not a great quarterback, but for his role, I think he fills
Yeah.
it pretty well. So I think that's where Stetson Bennett can emerge as a player of that magnitude, a high-end backup who can step in and make plays and not be afraid of the moment because he's been on some of the biggest stages. And I closed out
Absolutely.
the draft with Cincinnati safety Javon Hicks. Good size, can tackle well, seems to approach well when he tackles, good athleticism when he closes, maybe can be a special teams guy. So that's where I closed it out there right before the end of the draft. So I have 4 on the offense, 4 on defense, and the likelihood that they will remain these exact picks in terms of where they pick and the number of picks, I think is unlikely. I think there's going to be some kind of trade, some kind of wheeling and dealing at some point. But for the time being, those are the picks that I have. What do you think?
I like him. I like the Tyjae Spears pick.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a match made in heaven, really, because like you said, he's a guy that has an incredible ceiling. He's a local guy, and I think that kind of balances out maybe the drafting, reaching for the player. I don't think it's necessarily a reach if you just draft him a little bit higher in the third, but I think that's where it would work perfectly for the Saints.
And I think in that draft, I think Brissy gets on the field. I think Foskey gets on the field.
Mm-hmm.
I think Tajay gets on the field. And I think the tight end, Kuntz, gets on the field as
Yeah.
well. So you're talking about guys that can make day one impacts from middle rounds, not just the high-end guys. Talking about like the middle round guys that can get on the field. And I think it's certainly something I think that would be a nice draft if it all fell that way. Now, we have time? Yeah, we've got time.
We got time.
A little time. I don't know if you can see this. Okay.
Pause it and zoom in.
I live by this. I don't live by this, but I around this time of year, I look at this all the time. This is the estimated points chart.
Yeah.
Okay. I do this because you got to become acclimated with this when you're a Saints reporter / someone invested in how the Saints draft, like I am, because they move up so much.
Sure.
So it's good to have a kind of a guide in terms of what could they or couldn't they do in terms of trading up in the draft. I would say trading down, but until they actually do it, I'm just going to assume it's not going to ever happen. Because I even saw some out there saying, hey, at 29, the Saints could be in a perfect position to trade back because there's going to be somebody coming up to get a quarterback. Okay, fine. That's what you want to believe, go ahead. But until that happens, I'm going to stick with the fact that if they trade, it's going to be up. So, what scenario could happen to see the Saints moving up from 29? Let me just say, I think there's a strong chance they trade up at 29 into a higher pick.
If you had to put a percentage chance on it, what are you saying?
I think it's. Let me stay on the fence. 50% chance. How about
All
that?
right.
How about that?
Theme of the show, percentage.
29 is a long time to wait.
Yeah.
It's a long time to wait. And this is what happens, okay? Saints have their board. The NFL draft happens. Okay, Saints don't – there may be 30, I guess this year, 31 first-round picks in the draft. The Saints don't always have 31 first-round graded players. Sometimes they have more. Most of the time they have less. So they go by their board. So this is the scenario. Let me just play it out. I said it last night on Fox 8 Overtime Show. Saints will have 1 through 15. Okay, their prospects 1 through 15, and they're at 29. The likelihood their top 15 players all 15 get selected in the first 15 picks of the draft, highly unlikely. So what am I getting at? What I'm getting at is someone of their top 15 is likely going to slip out of the top 15 of the actual draft. Could be 1 or 2, could be 3 or 4, and the more they slip, or that they have the prospect they have high grades on, the more that prospect slips and slips and slips, then all of a sudden you get down to, say, 18, 19. You got a couple players that you like, they're still available, picking up the phone.
Yep.
You're picking up the phone and you're making the call to probably move up where? Well, let's see. I don't like the idea of the Saints giving up their 40th overall selection, the second round pick. I like the idea of keeping number 40. So what's next? Well, 71. 71 has a value of 235. Their 29th selection has a value of 640. So quick math in my head: 640 plus 235. Is that 875?
640 plus. Yep.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
875. This is an estimate. It's not guaranteed. Could get you up to 19, but it's almost too exact. So let's just be cautious and say up to 20. Okay? So you're on the phone, you can make the call to Seattle at 20. Hey, I'll offer you 1 and 3 to move up. You take 29, you get my third round selection. The fourth round pick, where they're at 115 that's a 64 value. 640 plus what did I just say? 64. So what is that? That's 706. That can get you up a couple spots to maybe 25 or 26. That's the move to me. It's either the first and third to go up to the high 20s, 21, 22, 23, or it's first and fourth to go up a couple of spots for someone that might be slipping that they have a high-graded prospect on. That's what it is. That's what happens. It's their board versus what's going on and who do they have a high grade on. Because if you're at 29 and you have a chance to grab the 14th player graded prospect on your board, they're going to look at that and say, that's an impact player. We got to make that move. That's just how they're always going to think. You can hope that player slips all the way back to you to 29, but the Saints, in most cases, choose to go up. Not to mention the fact, as I mentioned earlier, 29 is a long time to wait to pick their guy. So I do expect them to make calls. I don't know if they can. We don't know until the draft comes if they can make the deal happen. But that's the deal. A couple things I don't want to see. I don't want to see them give up their second-round pick this year. I don't want to see them give up next year's first-round pick. They did that last year. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I don't doing that back-to-back years, to me, I don't think that's a smart move. So if the move happens, it's first and third or first and fourth to get up in the 20s to get a player they have highly graded on their board. And that, my friends, is your mock draft / trade-up draft lesson session for today. So,
all right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, like, rate, subscribe, review, everything. And you guys can find our mock drafts on fox8live.com. We'll go into more. You can read the minutia of the mock drafts on the website as well if you're more into that thing, and I'll have all the data compressed into an article for you to digest. But for Sean Fazan, I'm Vasilios. This has been the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. Catch you guys next time.